Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
General Motors is set to spend $27 billion by 2025 on EVs, or electric vehicles. It's taking aim at Tesla and other auto manufacturers as it starts to get aggressive on electric vehicles. Today, we're also going to look at, can an algorithm prevent suicide? We talk a lot about artificial intelligence and some of the scary things, but what about the positive things? Of course, if we're going to talk positive, we also have to mention that there's now companies in the business of selling fake people. Yes, fake faces online. Is this dangerous? Maybe. You'll have to listen to find out. But we couldn't begin a conversation on fake faces, algorithms that could prevent suicide, and electric vehicles without.
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, some really interesting topics. I mean, we've talked a little bit about electric vehicles before, but now with Tesla's market share going up so highly and doing so well, it's really a case of the small guy forcing the big guys to come around and do something about it, which maybe then even forces the government to do something about charging stations. I mean, this is kind of an interesting and exciting time when you think of it that way. But it's also, can be a scary thing. So, and especially with, you start talking about artificial intelligence and you're making fake people and passing them off. And there are some, business ideas, I guess, that where this is helpful. But when you open up the Pandora's box, it makes it a little bit trepidatious. And the same with, it sounds good. We're going to maybe help people, identify people who might commit suicide, but will it really stop it from happening? That kind of is the question. So, some really interesting, topics for today's show.
So what's our word of the day before we get underway, so our listeners can be keeping track of our word usage?
Well, I kind of gave it away there early, and but it's going to be a very simple one. It's an adjective. Scary is the word today, because depending on your outlook, if you trust technology, these are wonderful things. And if you're someone who doesn't necessarily believe in technology or believe in the human race to use things well, some of these topics today could be extremely scary. So we're going to go with a very basic word, but I think it describes for many people one side of the topics today.
So as we look first up here, talk about GM accelerating its ambitions for electric vehicles. By the way, if you want to look at any of the 3 articles for today's show, they're linked at thestateofus.org. Great resources on our website, right, Lance? I mean, I think we've worked pretty hard to make the books that we've covered available there, to make the research that we talk about when we bring in guests from places like the Conference Board, the articles. We try to make it a resource so that if you want to see what we're looking at, you can find it. Because I think, we make a big deal of it because, we want you to go to our website. But I think it's also important, though, Lance, because this is part of what we're trying to do. Is we're not trying to be cagey about where we learned what we learned. It's like we want it to be easy for you to go find it and see, hey, we're searching for reliable information.
Well, I think it's very important to our listeners to know that we're not just making this stuff up, that when we say we get it from a certain place, you can go check it. You just don't have to believe us. You can check it and read it yourself, either before you listen, or while you listen, or after you listen. So I think it's one of the proudest things I am of this show is that we're not in any way being fake. We're bringing the text, making it available to you, and then talking about it. And so we can have this discussion from the same set of facts.
So when you look at this GM piece, Lance, I think a couple of the key things that stick out are what their chief executive has said. Okay. Because I think even just 5 or 10 years ago, you would not have heard this from a traditional automaker. Quote, "We are all in to establish leadership in electric vehicles. EVs are core to growing our business and creating shareholder value." She goes on to say that GM believes, quote, climate change is real and we want to be part of the solution. We are resolved as a management team to move even faster to expedite the transition to EVs. We want to lead in this space. We think the industry is transforming, and to lead it, you've got to be better than other folks. Although Tesla has a good jump and a number of startups are focused on electric vehicles, we're not going to cede leadership. So GM using some, I think, pretty strong language there to say, hey, look, we're focused on this. And keep in mind, this isn't, they're just saying it. They are budgeting to spend $27 billion by 2025. So over the next 5 years. And in addition, Lance, they're looking to introduce 30 electric vehicle models around the world by 2025. So over the next 5 years, you got 30 models rolling out. That's about 10 more than had previously been disclosed. 20 of those 30 models are going to be available in the United States.
We have a smaller market like Tesla pushing the envelope, and it's become so successful that it's forcing the big automakers or the bigger companies to find a way to compete. And in this market, people are, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, there's a large segment of our world's population and our governments around the world who do believe in climate change. You may not be one of those people, but more and more you are becoming the minority. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was, I know it was Great Britain, but their Prime Minister Johnson just came out in the last week or so and said something about no gas-powered cars would be sold in Great Britain after 2030 or 2035. Wasn't saying that you couldn't have it, but it's like you're not going to get to purchase any new ones. That from that point on, we are, so it's a phase out program. It's coming, folks, whether you want it or not. And then all of those things that we've talked about on the show before, as far as, the batteries. And I think most of what the article talked about too was GM's commitment to building a better battery, they thought it would have a power life of 400 miles, and they're saying now maybe they're hoping on 450. And they've just built a new plant here in Ohio, a plant that was shut down for building cars, a brand, a style of car for GM, and they're going to reopen it as a battery plant, and even maybe making batteries for other automakers as a way to stay, a big product of the market, because they're saying this is coming, folks, whether we like it or not, whether you like it or not, this is going to happen. They're kind of saying we're going to live and breathe on electric vehicles, which is interesting, and for some people it's kind of scary. I mean, for me, a couple of years ago, it was really scary. It was scary to buy it, 4 or 5 years ago. Now I'm looking, because where was I going to power it? How was it going to work? The technology was new.
You really nailed your use of the word scary there in your sentences. I think I got 5, by my count, 5 uses of scary.
Once I know the rules, I play the game to win. So
that's right.
It's scary to compete against me when I know the rules, and, people are scared to play when I play because I like to win.
So I think one important note, Lance, about market share is kind of this weird situation, right? Tesla is valued at $472 billion, which dwarfs GM significantly, who's only valued at $62 billion. But here's the real kicker. GM in the third quarter made $4 billion in profit, right? Tesla only made $331 million. You talk about that upside down world of startups, right? A company that made $331 million in profit, right? Compared to $4 billion in profits of General Motors. Now, Tesla is valued at more, but I think the thing that they have to watch out for, the real challenge that Tesla as that startup has, is if GM, Ford, and some of these others are really serious about what they're saying, and it looks like at least that General Motors is, General Motors has that capacity for scale, right? And that's what should scare Tesla and these others, is if GM is truly serious about 30 models widely available worldwide, That's literally 10 times the number of Teslas, right? The different types of Teslas, not quite 10 times, but the multiples of the number of Teslas available. And they're going to do that in 5 years. It's taken Tesla, 10 or 12 years to get to that point. So I think that's where you're going to probably see a shift or a market correction on Tesla, unless Tesla figures out how to really ramp up production. And that's part of what's going to make it interesting, is we're going to have a good old fashioned competition here in the US, right? That's going to push and hopefully deliver to consumers something that's better. Because you talked about climate change, but I think for the people that are scared about upgrading to an electric vehicle or worried about what might happen, it's important to keep in mind that whether or not you have a situation, right, where you're worried about climate change, whether or not you think that's a real issue, the reality is owning an electric vehicle in terms of operating costs is far cheaper than a gas vehicle. It's better for you as a consumer, dollar per mile. It's significantly better. And we're not talking about significantly better by like a reduction of 10%. We're talking about reductions of 60, 70, 80% operating cost, right? The rapid progression is going to be what's interesting as these companies start pouring that money in. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention that the president-elect has said, that he has a goal of putting in 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations, which, by the way, if any of you are curious about how many gas stations, there's about 175,000 gas stations. So you would have far more access to charging stations than you would a gas station should that plan materialize. So I think a lot of that stuff, it's going to be really interesting to see, over the next 10 years, how the car market really changes. And we're tracking the technological changes here on The State of Us. Yes, some of them might be scary, but some of them are exciting too. And that's what we're looking at next, is one of those that's a little bit scary. The idea of companies selling fake people, right? You need some people for your website. You need some photos. Well, you can go buy photos. And no, we're not talking about models. We're talking about fake people, right? They don't exist, never have, never will, completely conjured by the imagination of Lance's favorite thing, a computer. To find out more about what we're discussing, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Designed to deceive. Do these people look real to you? Well, we'd encourage you at this point, if you're, not driving or whatever, take an opportunity, pull open this article at thestateofus.org, because I think if you look at what Lance and I have looked at, you'll start to get an idea of they look as real to me, Lance, as anything I've ever seen. Yes, when they point out to you some of the things you can look for, you start to see it. But boy, at first glance, you wouldn't know that these are fake people. You'd look right at them and think, yeah, that's a person. That's a real individual. From the article, there are now businesses that sell fake people. On the website generated.photos, you can buy a, quote, unique, worry-free fake person for $2.99 or 1,000 people for $1,000. If you just need a couple of fake people for characters in a video game or to make your company website appear more diverse, you can get their photos for free on thispersondoesnotexist.com. You adjust their likeness as needed, make them old or young, change their ethnicity, and if you want your fake person animated, there's even a company that can do that. So it really, Lance, it really is one of your doomsday scenarios, right? You're browsing along and looking at people that want to be your friend, and they look like genuine people, but they're not, are they? They're simulated.
This is where this is the scary one. Okay, for me, this is the one that just gives me the willies, because it's kind of cool when you think of it, and and it makes sense in business. You need to have create an ad. Hey, you don't have to pay anybody and take pictures of them. You can just, get some artificial intelligence or use this company and buy the people that you want to put in your ad. But it's what the human mind can think to do to be devious with this that is the scary part. And then, where do you go with this? I mean, this is only 5-6 years ago. It says in the article that the first tech appeared to do this in 2014 and it was bad. It was awful. But now they have to point out the differences. And when they do, they're right. We can concentrate on them and see them. But when you see this, and man, when you flip through the article, I was so scared with it that I just didn't even want to see it. I just wanted to get to the part and read it, because as you scan over the pictures, the people change, and you can control their age. You can control the slant of their eyes. You can control their personality, that whether they're bubbly or happy or sad, and you can create these people to look like whatever you want. That just kind of freaks me out. And we let our minds wander and have some fun with it. So, I can see the business side of it. I can see having fun with this, but it's a little scary when you think about what people can do to fake you out and how you think you're looking at real things and you're not. And then you run into that whole thing of, what does that do with this whole issue of body image and what people look like and comparing yourself to someone else? We already talked about things that are photoshopped and the models and things like this. Heck, now you can just create whatever your ideal person is and do that. And it's just like, what does that do with those of, with the rest of us who aren't fake, and we have to deal with the real parts of our body?
There's a lot of implications, obviously. The article explains that these simulated people are starting to show up around the internet, used as masks by real people with nefarious intent, spies who don an attractive face in an effort to infiltrate the intelligence community, right-wing propagandists who hide behind fake profiles, photo and all, and online harassers who troll their targets with a friendly visage. So it really is, it can be pretty scary, Lance, when you start to think about it, because there's a lot of different ways, right, that this can be used, that it can be deployed against people. But at the same time, as you've pointed out, there's obviously the part that we have to taper with. Isn't it amazing how quickly technology is progressing? I think it's all the more reason when you and I talk about the importance of our leaders in government taking tech regulation seriously, because the rate at which it's progressing is already so much faster than we are reacting with legislation. We've got to. We must, people. We must start catching up, because all that's happening right now, right? We're staying the same and tech is progressing faster and faster. So what's happening? That gap is widening. We've talked about this idea that, well, if I just stay the same, I'm not going to get any better or any worse. No, you get worse because other people are getting better, right? It's that same notion of, well, we live in a rural area and we like things the way they are, so we're just going to keep them the way they are and everything will be fine. No, it's not how it works, right? If everywhere else is growing and you're staying the same, you are shrinking as a matter of proportion. And that's the same philosophy here. The longer we put it off, the more dangerous it becomes, because the longer it will exist without reasonable precautions in place. And I think you and I, Lance, we've witnessed how poorly equipped most of our leaders in government are, Democrats and Republicans alike, to know the first thing about what to do about any of this, let alone actually pass any legislation.
Well, three things that I'll comment on very quickly that you brought up. One is many members of Congress. Now, there are some younger ones, but a lot of the people in power are as old or older than me. And we don't necessarily have a very great grasp on technology. Doing this show and being around you and the Devon creature, it has enhanced my ability to do things, but I still don't understand all of it. So we're asking these people to make laws and they don't understand it. Secondly, when you're talking about it from a historical perspective, I think of this as the wild, wild west days, of the wild west days of technology, in that it's pretty lawless out there. And there aren't any laws. There aren't any rules, or very, very little. Like you said, the rules aren't keeping up with the technology. So you can do a whole lot of things out there and everybody's like, oh, you can't do that. And you say, well, what's the law that says I can't? Like these fake pictures of people. There's no law against that. So you can do a whole lot of things that there are no laws for. And then the final piece that I would say is, I used to teach in class all the time that when you're faced with a problem, you have two options. Once you realize there's a problem, you can deal with it and it might not be any fun, but if you don't deal with the problem, which is your other choice, the problem is just going to get worse and make it harder to deal with. And that's what we have here. Those are the things that I thought about, that we're asking people who are older, who don't have maybe the knowledge, and they have a lot of knowledge, but not in technology, to make laws on something that they don't understand. This is the Wild West in that it's developing so quickly. There are no laws or nobody out there to stop all it or to control what's going on. And third, the longer you go without dealing with the problem, the bigger it's going to get. And all three of those things fit this scenario. And that's what makes it scary.
I got another tick for you, Lance. I think we're pretty close to tied right now. We'll see who can bring it home. But as our listeners,
well, you're keeping score, so I doubt if I win. So
well, see, I'm not. You've always got plausible deniability, don't you? It's I make the rules. So if I win, then it was rigged, and if I win and I'm keeping the score, then it's my fault, right?
Yeah, it's a rigged game.
It's rigged. It's rigged.
Yeah. It's rigged.
It's rigged. All right. Well,
goodness. But no, go ahead. So, but that's my takeaway from what you said.
Yeah.
Is those three things. I mean, historically, that's what it seems like to me. And you're going to ask me how to regulate this? I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
I think I'd be pretty good at passing laws, but I'd need a whole lot of people to give me good information to figure out what kind of laws I should pass.
The implications of this, people have to keep in mind, right? It's not just people posing as fake individuals. The other thing is that we have to keep in mind as we're creating artificial intelligence, right? Because we've talked a lot about this on the program. It's easy. You could be listening out there and just, shut it down, stop it. That's not how it works, right? If we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. So it's much better. Let's figure out how do we deal with it? How do we use it in a smart way? We've tried that whole turn a blind eye approach before as a nation on different things, and it pretty much never works. It's
Pandora's box, right?
Right.
We've already opened it up. It's going to exist. It's going to happen. Yep. So either get out in front of it and become a part of it and lead the direction, lead it, or you're just going to, be the tail wagging the dog. You're just going to follow.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't shove it back in the box and lock the lid. It's there.
When you think about how important this is, everybody at home, right? Keep this in mind. The article made this point. And I think it's really important to understand. Artificial intelligence can make our lives easier, but ultimately it is as flawed as we are because we are behind all of it. Humans choose how AI systems are made and what data they are exposed to. We choose the voices that teach virtual assistants to hear, leading these systems not to understand people with accents. We design a computer program to predict a person's criminal behavior by feeding it data about past rulings made by human judges, and in the process, baking in those judges' biases. We label the images that train computers to see, then they associate glasses with dweebs or nerds. And this all, right, folks, this all leads back to this single conclusion that the author draws of the article. The algorithms of Google and Bing sort the world's knowledge for us. Facebook's newsfeed filters the updates from our social circles and decides which are important enough to show us. With self-driving features in cars, we are putting our safety in the hands and eyes of software. We place a lot of trust in these systems, but they can be as fallible as us. And I think that it's important to understand two things. One, that describes most artificial intelligence right now. The other thing, and you want to talk about something scary, is it's not going to describe most artificial intelligence very long, because the process of machine learning is becoming such, and it's really hard to get your mind around, because Lance and I have talked about it a few times, and I think logically we've got it, but the concept that a computer can do something it was not programmed to do is difficult to materialize. And basically the way that happens in simple terms, right, is we use processes sometimes called like neural nets, for example, which basically is designed to mimic the way that a human brain learns. And we provide information to them. And then we let them make of it what they will, right? And as this process progresses, as it gets better, because it's not what necessarily what you would expect yet. They're learning without our input, right? We are not teaching them, do this, do that. We're merely providing information. And at some point, the assumption is we don't even have to provide information. If you hook them up to the internet, they can then decide what information they have access to, right? And then they can decide what to make of it without our input. And there's two sides to that. There's the side of that could be really good because these biases that we bake into the technology that we build that we don't even mean to bake in. Lance and I have talked some about the problems with some of the criminal justice software that's been deployed, right? Because the whole point of deploying it was to avoid bias. But in reality, because of who built the software, you've accidentally baked in biases. Like there was this and you all probably remember this story, right, about this facial recognition software. And, it's inherently biased or bad at recognizing people of color because when the program was being programmed, the person that programmed it, was not a person of color. And they were feeding more images, 90+% images of white people to the algorithm. So it didn't see many colored people, right? So then what you end up with is this algorithm that is inherently bad at recognizing people of color. And instead, what you want is something uniform. So there are advantages to getting people out of the process of programming them, but there's also the inherent fear that we have of removing ourselves from that process because that's where we start to lose control. So do you want control that's imperfect because we're involved, or do you want perfect control? And that's not a rhetorical question. It really is. I'm hoping to leave our listeners and give them the opportunity to think about that, Lance.
Well, it's just very simple. Is on one level, I can understand what's going on. And on another level, I can't. But I can't just sit back and say, oh, well, I don't have to worry about it. I need to get in and be a part of the decision because it's going to happen. And I think too many times people look at us and whereas the older generation and it's like, well, you guys don't even care. No, I mean, we care. And just because we maybe don't understand it to your level, we do understand the importance of it and the need to have this discussion and to put some parameters on this and try to control it because it's like those sci-fi movies I watched when I was a little kid. It's like, oh, the machines are going to take over the world. Folks, that's a closer reality than I think a lot of people realize. Like you said, the technology is such that these computers can think. And yes, I can read very quickly. I'm very skilled at reading and I can go on the internet and I can read articles and read articles. You hook a computer up to the internet, how quickly are they going to take in that information and process it and be able to make decisions? There's no way the human brain can stay up with that with the speed and efficiency of a machine. And so it's like, that's where, and this isn't to win, but that's where it's scary. It's like, how do we develop these plans? How do we develop these laws to make sure that machines just don't take over our world? And while that used to be science fiction in my lifetime, 50 years ago as a little kid, I can see it as a much more of a possible reality here in the next 50 years.
And that's why we want to talk about, right, not just the scary side of things, which is kind of what we've talked about here, but also hopefully the side that makes us optimistic about the future, right? And being able to deploy technology in positive ways, in good ways. Can an algorithm prevent suicide? Well, the Department of Veterans Affairs thinks it can help. And to find out more about what we're talking about here, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The Department of Veterans Affairs has turned to machine learning to help identify vets at risk of taking their own lives. Obviously, this is, it's a very real problem. The article points out that for more than a decade, health officials have watched in vain as suicide rates climbed steadily by 30% nationally since 2000. In 20 years, folks, a 30% increase. and rates in the VA system have been higher than in the general population. The trends have defied easy explanation and driven investment in blind analysis, machine learning, or AI-assisted algorithms that search medical and other records for patterns historically associated with suicides or attempts in large clinical populations. What this has resulted in is a program that that Veterans Affairs is using to help identify high-risk individuals, right? Not saying these people are suicidal, but saying, look, we've scanned the historical data, and here's all the markers, right, that make somebody likely to either attempt suicide or successfully commit suicide. And we are working to flag these individuals and check in with them proactively. So obviously on a surface level, it sounds pretty good to me, Lance, right? I mean, we're using a blind system, so you're not getting into the same, privacy concerns as you would if you were having individual people scan all these records. You're also, from a logistics standpoint, you mentioned in the last segment, you're not talking about the same kind of work, right? We can turn this over to a machine and it's not going to get tired, and we don't have to pay it and we don't have to feed it. It's going to do its thing, and it's going to let us know, hey, here's the list of people that you need to reach out to because they meet the markers that we know make them, quote unquote, high risk.
But here's where I have a problem with it. And that is that it's not necessarily going to stop anything. You're trying to increase the odds of keeping an eye on these people and getting them help so that they don't take that last step. But as it points out, there are things they plug in that don't meet all the people who end up taking their own life. So it's not going to catch everybody anyway. So, the title's misleading in that it's going to stop suicides. I don't think it will. And even the article doesn't say that it's diminishing or stopping anybody from committing suicide. All it does is let the computer tell you this is somebody that you should check in with every once in a while and talk to and make sure this, that, and the other, so that it's not as easy for them to do this because they're likely to. But then there are other people that slip through the cracks and go ahead and take their own life without it. So we can't just bank on it. I mean, it's a horrible situation when somebody feels that desperation that they have to do this and that they have to act on it. And unfortunately, in my life, I've had to deal with that too many times as a teacher in the public school system. Once is too many, but it's been on multiple occasions. And, everybody's like, oh, we didn't see it coming. Okay. If we had, would we have been able to stop them? This is where this is a great idea. I hope it works, but there's nothing in the article that convinces me that this is going to make this awful situation any better.
I think one of the tough things about artificial intelligence, and we touched on this a little bit in the last segment, is two things. One is we almost place this, and we all do it to some extent, folks. I mean, I'm sorry. Even if you're out there listening, you're like, I don't trust computers. I never trust computers. Yeah, well, I'm pretty darn sure that we could find an instance in your life where you've trusted a computer when you shouldn't have trusted a computer. We've all done it. Some of us do it more than others, but that's just how it is because we are, again, like it or not, and some of us more so than others, we're inherently trusting because we believe computers to be infallible. So this is two-pronged here because I'm saying that they're both fallible and that they're better than us simultaneously, but in different ways, right? Understanding where they're fallible and understanding how they're superior are important to us deciding what to do with them and how to use them. And it changes. It doesn't stay the same. Computers are inherently better at scanning a database than a person. They just are, and they probably always will be. Lance could practice for, 12 hours a day, every day for a year, and probably every computer on planet Earth would still search a database faster and more efficiently than him. And that's just how it is because we are inherently not good at certain things as people because of the way we're made. And computers are inherently good at things because of the way they're made. So there are opportunities like this to deploy things where there could be great success. I think to your point though, Lance, and the article even mentions this, the director of the Center for Ethics and Policy at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh points out that it's a critical test for big data systems, right? Because if these things have a high rate of false positives, for instance, that marks a lot of people at high risk who are not in fact high risk. And the stigma associated with that could be harmful downstream. We have to be sure these risks flags lead to people getting better or more help, not somehow being punished. And that is a key, right? Because it's great to identify things proactively, but how we then make contact with people about it, we have to be careful about, right? Because if you get a phone call that says, you've been identified as likely to commit suicide, that's probably not the way that we want to handle it, right? Because if this person's never even thought about that, but they're not in a great mind space, it's not to say that you don't tell them, right? Because that's that fine ethical line where, and that's where I think we have to be careful, because we too often, we use the machine to do the first step, and then we slack on the other steps, right?
Right. The humans step in, and that's when the humans use the data for harm, even if it's not on purpose.
Not intended that way.
Even if it's not intentional, they use the data and end up harming the situation or making the situation worse. And that's the fear. And that, again, you're right. That's not the fault of the robot or the computer or the artificial intelligence or whatever word it is, but it still makes it scary when you think about the impact that a program like this could have on individuals and on families. Now, the flip side is, if you stop it and they show that, people who take their life, that this goes down because of this program, they can prove that, then wonderful. But just a little bit leery of, will it, as you pointed out, cause more problems than it helps? So, we do this because here at True Chat, we have a mission. Our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've had this, it's obviously you can tell Justin knows more about this stuff than I do, but I have a perspective that I think a lot of people have out there as well. And we talk about it to ask those questions and to get you to think about it and figure out what to do. And if we've done that and you like the way we go about it, then tell people, because the more we can get people to talk about these things that we do in the fashion that we do, then I think the better we can make this world that we live in. So let your family and friends know that they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is released as a podcast Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. in the Eastern Time Zone. We're also a syndicated radio program heard across the country in select talk radio markets, so be sure to check your local radio station, see if they carry The State of Us. If they don't, do us a favor. Call them up, tell them they should. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our editing producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.